All right, well, we've been dealing a lot with verbs over the past, well, who knows, many years at this point? I'm just kidding! There's only been like 12 total verb lessons, at least in tense, but today we're going to be talking about specific helping verbs called modal verbs. Modal verbs give the reader or the listener or the speaker an added little bit of information that is really important for you to know, which is why today we are going to introduce to you modal verbs. So these are words, verbs, that will come at the beginning of verb constructions in order to provide a little bit more information on the action or the state of being used. These will always come at the beginning of your verb constructions, which means that if anything is going to change in accordance to time, past, present, future, it's going to be the modal verb. Remember that it's only the first word in a verb construction that changes according to time, which is why those verb tense patterns, the progressive patterns, the perfect patterns, the perfect progressive patterns, those are really important for you to learn, because once you know what changes and what doesn't, or how things change, then your writing becomes so much simpler. But today we're just going to be introducing some of these concepts to you. The first one is can. The past tense of can would be could. This is going to get a little confusing because all of the past tenses can also be used as present tenses, and the meaning slightly changes, which is why we're introducing you these in a particular order. But if you can do something, well, we're talking about your ability. You might also ask someone, can I do something? Which means you're asking for an ability, which essentially is asking for permission. And then obviously if permission is granted, then you have the ability. So can is used for ability, permission, and sometimes even probability. Can this happen? Again, having some sort of idea of whether or not there is an ability, or if something can happen, it doesn't mean necessarily that it will happen. That would be a different modal verb. So can, at the beginning of the verb construction, will convey these, or one of these ideas, either ability, permission, or probability. Could is a little bit softer than can when it's used in sort of those present tenses. When it's not the past tense of this one, you could say, I could tell you more. It's a possibility, which is a little bit softer than probability. If something is probable, it's more likely. If something is possible, it's a little less likely. So could is kind of used as a softer version of can when it's, again, maybe it's easiest to talk about these in the simple present, generally speaking. And in that case, could would be a little softer than can. It's also used for polite requests, okay? So again, you could ask permission, and this is a little bit more formal or a little bit more polite. Could I go to the bathroom? Well, not right now because we're shooting a video. May, similarly, is used for probability. It's kind of like a more formal or a little bit softer version of can. Many of these relationships are very similar. Only a few of them are going to be really set apart as distinct. A lot of them, as you'll notice, have the same kind of meaning here. Probability and permission. And again, may is one of those words that is seen as a little bit more formal, a little bit more polite. Often when I was young, it's, can I go to the bathroom? I don't know. Can you? May I go to the bathroom? Yes, you may. So some people will sort of quibble over ability versus permission, but colloquially or descriptively or in the world, these pretty much mean the same thing. Might is simply possibility. This is not strength, because remember, that's a different kind of word. That's not being used as a modal verb. Might, someone's strength, is being used as a noun. Same word, same spelling, different meaning. If you might do something, it's possible. And again, remember that possibility is a little bit less likely than probability. If you might go out for dinner, it's probably not very likely. Okay? But it remains a possibility. Now, if you must go out for dinner, well, you have to go. It has to be done. It is necessary or essential. If something must happen, it is going to happen. Nothing will stop it. That's the idea. Moving on, shall and should. Now, as you can see, should in this context is the past of shall, and shall is actually a modal verb that has very much fallen out of fashion. You could say that shall is a little bit archaic. It's old. Not a lot of people use it anymore, but maybe you want to bring it back because shall can be seen as very polite. If you say, I shall help you if you need help, then what you are doing is you are speaking your intention. You're making kind of a promise, or you are putting yourself under a sense of obligation. You are saying, essentially, this is something you will do. Oh, sorry, will. Oh, it comes later. It's something you will do, but it's, again, a little bit more polite. And unfortunately, not used very often, but should is often used. So while this kind of a should you may not come across, you will come across this, or at least you should. Should is generally used to give advice. I think you should be taking notes, especially if you're in one of our classes. Where's your pencil? Are you even listening? Are you paying attention? Yeah, I'm talking to you. You should be taking notes. That's what you should be doing. That's my opinion. Remember, whenever anyone is giving advice, they're always giving an opinion. It could be a true opinion, or you may disagree. But this advice is putting you, the listener or the receiver, under some kind of obligation. Someone is telling you you should do something, and you can either accept that and say, all right, I shall. Or you can reject it and say, no, I don't want to. Which seems to be what happens most of the time. But that's a different lesson. A lesson on obedience. And not what we're talking about today at all. Will or would. Will is the simple present. Would be the past. And this is talking about predictions. Things that you will do in the future. And again, that's putting you under a very strong sense of obligation. Essentially, if you're using this word, you're making some kind of a promise, or it could even be some spontaneous decision, like, you know what? I will go on to the next word. But not yet, because we might still have some things to talk about. So if you're making a decision right now, and it's happening, again, all of this kind of blends into the same idea of future prediction. Something I'm doing right now, well, will is the word. Would is used for hypothetical situations or imagined situations. You can say, man, well, if I was going to give examples, I think I would start doing those right about now. So let's look at some examples of using these modal verbs in context. So, if you know a person and he can touch his toes, remember that this is just showing ability. If he then demonstrates that ability, we would say he touches his toes. So remember that in the simple present, he can touch, can being the modal verb coming first, we wouldn't say he can touches his toes. That doesn't make sense. It's only the first word in any multiple verb constructions that is going to change according to that time tense, past, present, future. The important thing is that you remember the patterns of simple, progressive, perfect, or perfect progressive, because those have very specific construction patterns that you need to learn, and then all of this becomes really easy. So just learn the patterns. We'll actually be doing a video on that shortly. So, He can touch his toes. I couldn't do that at his age. So again, this is the past tense. Not only is it past, it's also negative. So even the negation, we wouldn't say I not could do that. That doesn't make sense. The modal verb comes first. I could not do that at his age. Not I could not did that. No, we wouldn't do that. This is the past tense. This is changing for the time because I'm talking about when I was his age. But the past tense is taken care of here. This is the past of the present can ability. Not to be confused with she could try. So that third person, a female, looking, could try to touch her own toes, but she doesn't have to. This is just possibility. So you can see the difference. Ability, he can touch his toes, it's something he can do. Possibility, she could try, but no one is forcing her. She doesn't have to try. She can choose. Can choose. She has the ability to choose. They may eat together, but that might have been an old message. So here you can imagine if you're looking at your cell phone and you see you have a message and you listen to the message. Do people still get messages on their cell phones these days? I know I used to. And then I hear a message saying that people are going to be eating together. Well, now we're in a realm of possibility. We don't know what is happening. We have no certain information. We know that they may eat together, but that might have been an old message. Now, it's really important when we use the past tense of possibility that you recognize it's always going to be added with a perfect construction, okay? So it might have been. This is a perfect, past perfect construction, okay? And you need to be able to recognize that. We wouldn't say, well, to put it more simply, if I take this all away and I am certain, if it's no longer a matter of possibility, then what would this latter half of the sentence read? It would say, but that was an old message. See, if I know for certain, we wouldn't have to use might have been, we would just state it definitively, it was. So for possibility, we can't say for sure what happened in the past. We can't use that kind of construction. We have to say it might have been. Does that make sense? Well, let's go back into the future, or into the present. We might be joining them. Okay? Period. We might be joining them. Again, it's in the realm of possibility. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay? But this progressive tense, you know, is be verb, be plus verb ing, and here we have be as the infinitive, and we have the progressive of our coming together, our joining, okay? So we might be joining them. In fact, we must. We have to. We need to, because maybe I have important things to say, or maybe I'm just really hungry. Okay? So, here, possibility in the present, okay? And necessity. This has to happen. Let's look at the other half right now. Continuing right along, here we have a small conversation, and that's going to be really important when we look at the total thing, but I'm just going to read through the first part first, which makes sense. The first usually comes first. So, imagine you're driving on a long road trip with a friend, and you notice your friend is starting to fall asleep, and maybe you, hey, psst, shall I drive? I should have offered earlier. So here, remember that shall is a little dated, it's a little archaic, you probably won't hear it very often, but you're being polite to your driving friend, so you say, shall I drive? Remember that as questions go, questions generally will always start with a verb, and modal verbs commonly begin those questions, okay? So these work as question verbs, We wouldn't say, do I shall drive or some weird thing like that. Just shall I drive. These can start your questions. And the addition of that is shall in the past tense, right? I should have offered earlier. And we already talked about when you have these possibilities and these probabilities, you can't have that simple past, right? You can't say I offered earlier. I mean, that's just not true. But it's the perfect construction. Now imagine your friend's response. Yes, you should. Should what? It's really important here to understand that this sentence would not work without this question or without this context. You cannot use modal verbs by themselves. You cannot just go into a room and say, I must, or I could. You need context, okay? Modal verbs by themselves beg the question of the necessary functioning main verb in the thought, okay? That's always necessary. So this only works because it's a response to a question. James said he will meet us here. Now, the important thing here is that I told you that the modal verb always begins verb constructions, but here we have a blue word, a verb, first, before the red. So what's going on? Well, here, James is the subject, said is the main verb in the sentence, and then we have a little division. We have something new going on. This is what James said. James said he will meet us here. So this is not a single verb construction. These are two separate ideas. James said he will meet us here. So, in the past, he said this, which makes this a future possibility, or not possibility, certainty. Remember, will, it is going to happen, okay? As a child, he would walk everywhere. Now you're remembering the past about James. And whenever James was going somewhere, he always said, I will walk, I will walk. And as you remember, as you think back, you can say, he would walk everywhere. Would being the past tense of someone saying, essentially, I will, or something that always did happen with certainty, okay? So would in this context is the past of will. Now, the last little sentence here, I would never walk that far. And the last thing I wanted to show you was that, yes, you can have the modal verb first, but you can have things in between sometimes in terms of the modal verb and the main verb. Here we have the adverb, the negation, never, okay? So maybe James would walk that far, but I would never walk that far. With that, let's review.
Intro to modal verbs. What are modal verbs? Modal verbs are helping verbs that express relationships such as necessity or possibility. Where do you find modal verbs in a sentence? Modal verbs are found at the beginning of a verb tense construction. If a verb tense construction has more than one word, which word would you change to show a specific tense? You would only change the first word in a verb tense construction to show a specific tense. What are the modal verbs that can function as either past or present tenses? Could, might, should, and would can function as either past or present tenses. Which modal verb shows ability? Can shows ability. What do can and may have in common? They can both be used to give or request permission. What is the difference between possibility and probability? Probability is more likely to happen. Possibility is less likely to happen. Which modal verb is least common? Why? Shall is least common because it is archaic, old, obsolete, or out of fashion. Which modal verb is used to show necessity? Must shows necessity. How is should most often used? Should is most often used to give advice. In what context is will most commonly used? Will is most commonly used in the future tenses. What is a hypothetical situation? Which modal verb is used to show this? A hypothetical situation is an imaginary situation. Would is used to show hypothetical situations.